I'm really excited about this next session. I hope that you enjoyed my conversation with Steve. Lots of pearls of wisdom there that I hope that you'll take away. But I'm stepping into the next session, and I'm really excited about it. This is C-suite best in class with luminaries, I will say, from across the world. I'm very excited to welcome Jeremy Awori, Ruth Harrison, and Keri Putnam. Keri very early in the morning in Los Angeles, Jeremy towards the end of his day in Nairobi, and Ruth right in the middle in London, and me in Washington, in DC. So welcome to the three of you. It is a pleasure to have you. There's a lot going on in our world. We've experienced lots of environmental challenges as a result of COVID-19, the racial reckoning, rapidly changing economic landscape. There's just lots of things. And I think one of the biggest things that we'd like to focus on today is you as leaders and the strategies that you're employing to navigate this new normal, right? People think it's going to go back. I think it won't. Love to hear what you have to say about that. But before we get into it, I'd love to just have you introduce yourselves and talk a little bit about who you are, your business, and maybe your biggest business challenge that you're facing as we launch. Jeremy, I'll start with you, the MD of Absa Bank Kenya PLC in Nairobi. Over to you. Welcome.
Yeah, sure. Thanks, India. Yeah. So I'm the CEO of Absa Bank Kenya here at the moment. We were formerly known as Barclays Bank, which many of you will know, and we've just transitioned from Barclays to Absa, which is a regional bank. We're a full-scale commercial bank, the biggest international bank in the country, and we offer the full suite of services. We've got several thousand people here and operate, as you say, right across the country. So when this crisis hit, essentially we were all thrown into something that we could not plan for. We had just launched our new brand, Absa, into the market. And we had a whole strategy around how we were going to land the brand, campaigns we were going to run, products we were going to run. And then all of a sudden, we're into the COVID-19 pandemic. And we were thrust into a situation whereby we had curfews and people were not supposed to go to work. Everybody was scared. We had to adopt new principles like hand washing, social distance, sanitizing, wearing masks. And then we had regulatory instructions put in place because we wanted to minimize people's interaction with one another. So that really threw our plans almost onto their head. And we had to solve for this. And because banks were deemed as an essential service, we not just had to worry about ourselves running our business, but also how did we keep our colleagues safe? How do we keep our customers safe? And at the same time, manage our business. And the big issues were companies was really struggling running their businesses because with the curfews in place and the restrictions on movement, when the country was shut down, no flights in or out, that really affected our trade flows. So we had to see how do we support our customers, and that was the biggest thing. We took a view of being much more humane, really thinking about what our customers and our colleagues were worried about and how we could help them through this pandemic before anything else. It wasn't a time just to think about how much profit we can make and how we can be opportunistic. From a bank perspective, it was how do we support our customers? In the middle of that, I was honored to be asked by the president of the country, His Excellency Uhuru Kenyatta, to be on a national emergency COVID fund board to help manage some of the activities around this at a national level. And we really saw the best of companies coming together to solve for these problems. And what was exciting is there were no real rules because nobody knew the answers. So we had to be very agile and we had to, as I say, help our customers through this. And that working remotely, business continuity plans, having situations where you had backups, team A, team B, team C, to make sure if one site got an infection that you didn't decimate your service provision. Educating customers as to how to work remotely was a key thing. At the same time, worrying about the fear of colleagues of something we were told had a high probability of potentially causing us real illness and even potentially death. Having seen the numbers in Europe. So there was a lot of work around settling people down, managing in a calm fashion, and being agile to the situation as it evolved.
Thank you. Thank you. There's lots of pearls to pick from that one, and we'll get into that. I have great questions around just those things. Ruth, welcome over to you. Would love to hear about Thoughtworks and what you're doing there, your role, and just some of what you're experiencing at the moment.
Indeed, thank you for the opportunity to participate. So I'm Ruth Harrison, Managing Director of Thoughtworks in the UK. Thoughtworks, we're a global software and business consultancy established 27 years ago in Chicago. And what's quite unique about us is we were started as a social experiment. Our founder had a belief that if you had a problem and you put a team of smart people together, they'd solve it. And here we are 27 years later, still doing that for our clients, but on a much bigger scale now. We're a global organization in 17 countries, 43 offices, and there's 7,500 thought workers working internationally to help our clients. I think the interesting point, about how to deal with the current pandemic is that as a technology organization, for us, we were the founders of the Agile Manifesto, and Agile and working remotely is something that we're very adept at. So for us, working remote first and working at speed was something that we were able to respond to. Certainly what we were able to help our clients with was to assist them in their agility to move forward at pace. So I'm going to give you just an example of the stress that was happening to technology systems of our clients at the time when the pandemic hit in the UK at its peak. The UK operates the National Health Service, and it operates a call centre. So anyone who's feeling symptoms of ailment can call up and speak to somebody and get some advice. And ordinarily, their systems would take about 10,000 calls per day. At the height of the pandemic, that moved to 1 million calls per day of people who were anxious and wanting help and support. Now, any organization can stress test their technology stack and technology systems, but I don't think any organization could anticipate the volume of pressure that was going to come onto their technology systems and subsequently their workforce. Let's not, we're a technology company, we're very much a people company as well. That subsequent pressure was enormous. We received a telephone call at 11 p.m. at night from one of our contacts. We were on the ground with the team at 8 a.m. the next morning, ensuring that the NHS 111 system didn't fall over and it was able to operate. So that, for us, that's it's a great story of adding value, but it's also a great story of how we're helping our clients, but importantly, how our key competence is something that we were able to leverage at scale. And for us, the key component is that working remotely is something that can be done at pace and at scale, and I think many organisations now are realising the value of working remotely, but also subsequently the need to make sure that technology systems are fit for purpose. And I'm sure we'll come to more of that discussion as we progress through. But I would certainly say that the pandemic not only impacted health and well-being, but it's also, as I said, stress tested an awful lot of organisations that pre-COVID, I think organisations thought perhaps their technology systems were okay, fit for purpose, and I think the stress test that they've all come under has really separated those who were fit for purpose versus those who need to catch up very, very quickly. And we're clearly we've been propelled into the digital era much faster than some organisations were anticipating.
I think we were all propelled into the digital era much faster than any of us anticipated. I think about now, just even us in this way, right? This would be in a room somewhere, us having a conversation, and we're relying upon our digital platforms and the latency issues that we might face. We're in different parts of the world. I mean, it's been such a shift. So thank you, Ruth. And again, pearls that we will definitely tap into as we carry on the conversation. Keri, good to see you. Welcome. You are the CEO of Sundance Institute. People always think Sundance Film Festival, not understanding all of what sits behind that. Love to hear about the Sundance Institute and what you're doing and what you're experiencing.
Great. Thank you so much. Thank you. Thanks for having me. Well, as you said, India, I'm the CEO of Sundance Institute. It's a nonprofit that is very well known for the festival, the Sundance Film Festival that we produce every year, but lesser known for what we do all year long, which is supporting the visionary work of independent storytellers in film and all forms of media and theater. We do this sort of as an incubator. We offer direct creative, strategic, and financial support to artists. And then second to that, of course, we're a platform for their work to be discovered through the Sundance Film Festival and all the other public programs that we produce. So that's what we do. We reach storytellers everywhere. We really are working globally now. And we've got a terrific community of artists and audiences that come together around our platforms. So our offices now are located in LA, where I am, Park City, Utah, and New York. And we've had similar problems to what Ruth and Jeremy described of adapting and working remotely, and certainly talk about all of those things. I hope we'll come back to some of those. But you asked what our challenges are at the moment, and I wanted to just highlight a couple things that we're facing. We are in the midst of a massive digital transformation as an organization in order to try to produce the Sundance Film Festival in what will be its 37th edition, an event that typically draws about 120,000 people in Park City, Utah, largely online this year. And so what that's going to mean for our teams, for our audiences, for our artists, for our stakeholders, it's a very challenging project, and also involves a very fast culture shift for our organization and for our teams. So that's a particular challenge, which I'm happy to talk more about. And it's paired with another important one. I couldn't pick just one because they really are interwoven. As an arts nonprofit operating in the United States right now, we are so dependent on contributions and so dependent on a live event that to keep our organization financially sustainable at this time, deal with the headwinds of the economy, the headwinds of where urgent resources are going for public health and other issues. It is a really challenging balance between investing in the transformation that's going to set us up for the future post-COVID, and meeting the moment that our artists and our constituents need now, because we feel our festival is critical. Independent media is critical right now, while having that resource challenge. So that's what we're facing today.
Wow. So there's lots there. I'd like to just kind of dig into some of that a bit. And, it's interesting because there's I'm hearing, a lot around the impact of COVID and what COVID's done to your businesses. But I also suspect, and this is just to kind of wrap around, there are the other things, right? There's a upcoming election in the US, there's Brexit in the UK. In Kenya, you have your own issues as well. And I think one of the interesting things that's also happening is the response of people to the racial reckoning that's happening. The employees, like the pressure that we're getting from employees, I think everybody's getting from employees, and what that means too. So we'll kind of perhaps weave that in as we kind of go through these conversations. But Ruth, you talked a bit about Thoughtworks, and that it's you operate around the world. What are some of the more specific things that you're experiencing around the changing needs of your clients, and how are you able to help them transform? And more than that, though, and you talked a little bit about, for example, the issues around the NHS and some of the call center kind of things that you had to manage. But how much of the shift that has to happen is mindset change versus tech delivery?
India, I'm not sure this session will be long enough for the requirements, but let me just kind of give some of the top-line observations here. As a software organization, we believe in equitable tech. And what do I mean by that? Increasingly our clients who are digital transforming recognize that they need to be making products and services that are fit for the communities they serve. And that no longer is lip service. We have seen examples, and very recently, of technology that has built-in bias and built-in, whether it's consciously or otherwise, slants that could disadvantage certain communities. Fundamentally, that's wrong. If technology is built with diverse teams, then there is more probability of the products themselves actually being fit for purpose out in the communities. It has a higher chance of eradicating some of the biases that are there. Now, I'm calling this out as a fundamental because whatever geopolitical challenges are happening around the world, the frightening phrase, but the war on talent and the pressure on good talent becomes more evident. Organizations need to be looking far more broadly for their talent pool to bring in a real cross-section of people. And I think when we start talking about equality, it goes very, very broad. Age, ethnicity, gender, etc. It has to be representative. We now have, as a consequence of COVID, we have people who are not digitally savvy, not digital natives, who are not brought up with technology, who are now going to be disadvantaged because they've not been exposed to it, but because products and services are not necessarily being built with them in mind. And I'm using that just as an illustrative example. So there's a big responsibility on organizations as they're moving through the transformation to make sure that they are considering the talent and staffing complement of how products are built. But importantly, and I think this is another aspect, that as we are now in the digital era, firmly we're in the digital era, boards and executive boards and governing leadership needs to move away from managing in an analog fashion. And I look at work alongside many boards, and I still don't see CTOs, CIOs, or CDOs represented in the boardroom. In progressive organisations, I think that's different. But I think in very traditional organisations and those that have been very impacted recently, that mix and technology getting a seat at the table to have a voice and make a contribution is less evident. So I think we're looking at a real step change that's happening in the world. And if we can take any positives from that, I think it will start to inform what's happening in the boardroom. And I think it will then start to inform what's actually happening through the talent pool and the employment. And let's face it, unemployment is going to be high. And I think we need to be considering where we look for our talent go forward as well. So I hope that gives a flavour of, certainly from a technology perspective, we have a role to play in informing that with business leaders.
Absolutely. I mean, I think that kind of goes to the heart of it, to be fair. So, Jeremy, this is I'm picking up on a couple of things that you said, and as a matter of practice, right? Financial services attract scrutiny for a number of different things, and it's tightening and has gotten tighter and tighter over the years. I was at Lehman Brothers in 2008 and at Royal Bank of Scotland in 2009, ABN AMRO. So I have gone through that in spades. But I wanted to just kind of talk about some of the product-related changes that you made to support your customers through COVID, not specifically what they were, but some of the practical issues as it relates to process and from a practical and regulatory perspective, and the kind of opportunities for community engagement on the back of having done that and having made those changes quite rapidly to support your customers.
Yeah, I mean, and I think those were the big challenges, excuse me, that were there, because all of a sudden the government quite rightly took quite strong measures to try and curb COVID spread. So we had curfews put in place, which suddenly meant people couldn't move around the way they wanted to. And then obviously, because of that started affecting the hospitality industry, the hotel industry. So what was happening is, before you know it, people were being furloughed. So as a bank, what we had to do is to try and put ourselves really in the shoes of customers, employees, colleagues, and just in general, the community. So we had a number of products we wanted to launch. We pushed those back and instead focused on what can we do as a financial institution to support customers. So the first thing we did is we gave people reprieve and gave them loan repayment holidays. So we said, instead of worrying about paying your loan over the next few months, we will give you a reprieve and push those loan payments out, so that instead you can put your money and your cash flow into keeping your business afloat, because it doesn't make sense for your business to go down, even if you owe us money, you're not going to be able to pay back. So we wanted to support, and that made a massive difference to a lot of our clients. The challenge is we had tens and tens of thousands of customers where we had to calculate what this meant, communicate with them, get them to acknowledge and accept this is what they wanted. So the contact center volumes you talked about suddenly shot up, and we had to make sure we did this in the purview of really making sure we treated customers fairly. So that was one aspect. The other aspect for us is there were regulatory interventions which stopped us from doing certain things for good reason. A number of product pricing was waived. We, for example, could not levy any fees for certain of our products, understandably, to move things to the more digital-based transactions, which obviously impacted us on a day-to-day basis. And then also, really working remotely to support our customers was a new dimension. We're not in the West. We don't have all the things that are taken for granted in the West. So just really getting everything working remotely, using phones, using various devices, getting all our equipment ready to be able to work in this remote manner was quite a challenge. I mean, we had BCP, we've done stress testing as we've done anywhere else, but suddenly when you've got 50, 60, 70% of your people working remotely, that has a real implication, on your service and your products and the way you deliver them. So for us, when we were doing this, we were getting a lot of feedback from our customers. What do you want? What do you need? How can we help you? We were having daily meetings to review this, making decisions almost on the spot. We had a big set of feedback coming in from our colleagues. What are you concerned about? How do we make it easy for you to offer services to our customers? And they told us that, and we really started implementing. And what was really great was our board was on standby. If there was anything we needed referral to them on, we could make those decisions quickly. So we introduced a number of new products through this process. As I say, we had just actually changed brand, and we had this whole campaign, and some of the products we had to put on the back burner because they just weren't suitable at this point in time. I think now, as we're starting to resume a bit more of normality, because I actually think people are reaching the point where they're tired of being under curfew. They're tired of being constrained. That we've got to think about the next range of products that we can put in place that will actually try and bring the economy back into action. And to give you an idea, the loan repayments that we've done as an industry are a third of the lending book of this country. So it's massive. We've lost 1.7 million jobs through this COVID crisis. Thankfully, we haven't seen the level of deaths that some of the other countries have had, and God has blessed us from that side. But the economic impact has been severe, and we're not yet out of the woods. So we have to just keep adapting to our clients' needs and looking at the medium term rather than the short term financial implications. And thankfully, we were a strong, very liquid, very well capitalized business that could support our customers through this crisis.
Wow, I mean, there's a lot there. And, I think one of the kind of key things I'm just kind of hearing, and it was interesting because I was listening to you talk about your customers, talk about, your people, talk about the community. But one of the things I'd really like to just consider as I talk to all of you is the fact that, you're also humans in addition to being leaders, and you're experiencing these crises as citizens, as like everybody else is. Yet you have to kind of figure out a way of leading others through the uncertainty, which seems quite a feat. And so I really want to come back to that. Keri, I have a question for you, but I'd like to come back to that and kind of talk about what this means for you as individuals and as people, because the pressure of that. Is hard. People look to leaders for certainty in times of uncertainty, but you're kind of, we've had more changes in this last 6 months than I think we've had in modern history, in our lives probably. And so that brings something in terms of your ability to be able to navigate. And so the fact that even the three of you are sitting here looking as calm and collected as you are, I'm amazed by, I have to say, given everything else that's happening. So Keri, I'd like to come to you. I really admire your business, and I really love the work of the Institute as it is. But I'd just like to ask you a question about people don't know as much about the Institute, as you mentioned. But I'd really like to talk about your influence on emerging emerging and established artists and programs, and the backdrop, as a backdrop for the issues that have emerged, like kind of how you're solving them, as it relates to the ability to deliver programming, for example, during COVID-19. And you alluded to that a bit when you talked about having to try to produce a festival that attracts 120,000 people digitally. So what does that look like for you, and what's emerged as a result of that, and the issues around racial reckoning, both inside and outside of your org, particularly considering the demographic of your entire artist population, for example?
Yeah, it's a great question, and also could take a very long time to address everything you raised. So I'll try to just briefly hit on the program adaptation, give a little bit more meat to that. And there's one key thing that happened for us. We as we've discussed, the moving of our staff remotely was done very quickly and worked out fine. But the first thing we had to contend with was that incubation side of our work, where we do most of our work with artists. The artists usually come to us. They come in residency, and they spend, weeks at times in programs that we run for hundreds of artists throughout the summer, particularly. So we shifted all of those programs online because we knew that the artists needed community with one another, needed to continue their creative work. What we found was we were successful in doing that. It was a challenge. We were successful in doing that. As we met the artists there, we began to feel the disproportionate impact of both COVID and the racial justice reckoning on the community of artists that we support, who typically, it's a very diverse group, but typically we do have a high proportion of artists who've been from historically underrepresented groups in the United States. And as I'm sure you know, the effects of both the health crisis of COVID, the economic impact of COVID, and of course of what we're all experiencing in the racial justice reckoning has been particularly extreme. And so in a lot of cases, we needed to just stop and listen. And we needed to adapt and do our programs differently, spend more time together in community, understanding what they were facing, recognizing we can't just push forward to fix everything. We have to actually create space to hear what people are experiencing and determine how to go forward from there. And in doing that, we were able to learn a lot about ourselves. I think we've been, both from our staff and from our artists, in the context of the racial justice conversation that we're having today in the United States. Certainly the racism is nothing new, but the sort of heightened awareness. We've been really called to account to say how, not only what are we doing for artists, where we think we've got a very diverse group, but as an organization, what is our role in making sure that as a white-led organization, the way we operate, the way people feel when they come into our spaces, the way we actually work hard to eliminate racism in our organization structurally, is an equal part of our responsibility. And so we've been really listening to the experiences of our staff, of our artists, and it's been extraordinary bringing together the board, and we've done this throughout, both on the economic crisis and on the racial justice issue, bringing task forces of board and staff at all levels to sort of reimagine how we can listen better and work together more. And it's been quite extraordinary to see the effects of that, both on the artist community and I think on the staff. And we have a ton of work still to do, of course, but that's been some of the challenge and some of the response we've made.
Awesome. Thank you. Thank you for that. Thank you for sharing that. I have a question for each of you. It's a single question, but I'll ask it to each of you. And that's kind of at the start of this conversation, I asked you about kind of your biggest, when you were introducing yourself, your biggest business challenge, for example. And even though you're still working through it, we're all kind of still working through them. Can you just kind of share some strategies for how you've been thinking about this stuff? Like, how do you decide, for example, Jeremy, I know a lot of what you did is customer driven and customer led. And same for you, Ruth, too, actually for all of you. It's kind of driven by your constituents. But how do you start to think about that? How do you decide what to do? Can you give us a piece of advice or a strategy for where people might start? Because I think that's the thing, right? For you are all very seasoned business leaders. And there are some seasoned business leaders who are watching us, but also for folks who are kind of trying to navigate this, who are maybe leading for the first time or who are moving into leadership roles, what do they need to consider? And what's a piece of advice you could give them to think about? Keri, I'll actually start with you this time.
Yeah, the most important thing that I learned in this process, and it's been an extraordinary personal challenge, I want to say, just to your point earlier of how we feel, just the sequential progressive escalation of different issues and the colliding of them. The most extraordinary thing I've learned and I've experienced is collaborating with other organizations, peer organizations, organizations that may have in the past been competitors even. This field has come together in new ways. We actually created two examples of that I'll give. The first is in learning how to think about adapting our festival and learning how to think about adapting some of our programs. We created a series of conversations with other global festivals and other global arts organizations. And it was just amazing, the generosity and the peer-to-peer learning we were able to find from other leaders and one another that I think lifted us all up and actually led to very tangible collaborations that helped resources, but also helped us personally learn how to adapt from what others had experienced. So collaboration in new ways that might be entirely unexpected is one. And another example of that was shifting the ways we work. And the ways we work, I mean, in terms of how we deploy resources, also in the spirit of collaboration. Typically, we give grants directly to artists at Sundance, as I mentioned earlier. And we're very proud of our curatorial work, who we select, how we do it. But we recognize that at this moment, we surveyed our artists, and what they needed was urgent support. It wasn't necessarily exclusively support for the creative project that they were developing, which is typically how we select our artists and what our practice is. It was urgent support to pay their rent or live. And so we partnered with an organization of other arts organizations called Artist Relief, and we redeployed our granting money with the support of our funders to go into an urgent granting fund that went across all the arts with many other nonprofits and was able to deploy to independent artists across the country, which in fact, they're freelance workers and they are some of the most affected, as I mentioned earlier. So we were really, that's another example of both collaboration and a sort of shift in resources that came out of that listening process. So I'd say listening, collaborating, adapting, and recognizing that we can't, we're not going to know right away how to fix everything. I think a lot of us in these roles are comfortable being problem solvers or feeling like we need to be the quick fixers. What I've had to get comfortable with is I'm riding a wave. We're going to have to sit back. We're going to have to actually listen before we try to just fix, because some of these problems are way bigger than we can fix right away.
Absolutely. I mean, certainly. I mean, there are a couple of, the biggest thing that I'm hearing from each of you, just in listening to your responses, is that agility is a pretty important piece of this, right? Being able to be agile. And somebody gave me a really interesting piece of advice once, a boss of mine actually, because I was early in my career a fence sitter. I had difficult times making challenging decisions. And he said to me, people will forgive a bad or wrong decision. What they won't forgive is indecision. And so it's kind of like you make a decision based upon the information that you have in that moment. And so, Jeremy, I'm gonna come to you. You have a lot. There's a lot going on there in your business. What advice would you give to people about strategies they might employ for kind of stepping into these spaces and leading through crisis?
Yeah, I mean, I think what this situation showed was that you had volatility, uncertainty, complexity, and ambiguity all at one time. And when you're facing a crisis, you can go into business continuity mode, but you can only do it for so long. And then what I observed as a leader is we all have different staminas and we all have different levels of coping with stress. So we had to pay a lot of attention to the human side of this, which is people were scared. They weren't sure what was happening. They weren't sure how they were going to be affected. And then it started affecting them. People started knowing people got COVID. People started seeing loved ones losing their jobs. They started fearing. Schools were closed. The kids were home. Yeah, and they were now working from home in a way that they were not used to. And we had to really think about not just solving business problems, but paying a lot of attention to the human issues that people were going through, listening to them. We put in place programs that were psychosocial support programs. So yes, we did all the hand sanitizer, and we didn't just do it for employees, we did it for their families, giving them masks, etc. But the psychosocial support, we did care calls. How are you doing? What are you worried about? How can we help you get through this? How do we help you work remotely from home more comfortably? And we had to talk, we had lots of conversations around how to do this, because people were working harder than they'd ever worked in their lives. They were very stressed. Then you start finding sickness starts coming in. So taking care, being human, understanding, I think was essential. I think as leaders, you also have to make sense of the chaos and provide something that people can hold on to. So communication is essential. What's happening? What are we doing? How are we doing it? Accepting we might not get it right. The one thing the COVID crisis has shown us is 1 minute we're being told this, next minute we're told something else. There's a plethora of fake news out there, and people don't know what is real versus what is not. So we have to be very clear in our communication around what we're doing, and in some cases what we're not going to do and why we're not going to do it. And in the business context, we had a strategy we were executing. We had to say, we're putting this on the back burner now because it's not appropriate, and instead we're going to pivot to doing the following things, and this is why. So we had a lot of communication. We also, as you say, focused a lot on the customer and the community, so that we could make sure we were relevant to that. There was a lot of technical aspects of banking that we had to do, and we let the technical people deal with that, things on impairment, bad debt management, accounting treatment, regulatory standards. We didn't allow that complexity to affect our frontliners. So what I would say is people matter, making sure that people felt understood, felt listened to, and felt helped through this crisis. Now we face a different challenge. I think there's a level of complacency, and I don't necessarily think that the virus has fully gone away. So you really don't know how this thing is going to affect you until it affects you. So I would just say we still need to be careful, not let that complacency lead to a second wave in the case of Kenya, but to make sure that we still maintain the protocols whilst learning to run our business in a new way. The last challenge, I think, is that people felt this was a temporary thing, but now it's not a temporary thing. I don't think the world will ever go back to the way it was. Our ways of working are completely different. Things that people didn't believe that we could do, now we've seen we can do them. So we're going to have to decide which things are going to come back that we used to do and which ones aren't. And I think there's many ways. Personally, I like the fact that working remotely gives a level of flexibility, but I'm fortunate not so many people have the work environment or the home environment for that to be convenient. So those would be the things that I would bring out.
Well, that's so between the two of you, between you and Keri so far, I've heard empathy, communication, agility, collaboration, kind of knowing when to pivot. But I think the thing that's been in common between the two of you was also the people are kind of the fundamental baseline. People matter. People are how we get these things done. And the world has changed forever. One of the things that's been most amazing to me that I'm keeping my eye on is real estate, right? What's going to happen in the corporate real estate market now that folks recognize that we don't necessarily all need to be in the same building at the same time, but what that means economically for that market, right? So that's one thing that came to my mind as we talked about that. So Ruth, last but certainly not least, What are your thoughts about strategies that you can share on how people might step through this, how they might lead through crisis, what they might do next as we try to forge our way?
Indeed, and I very much strongly align with what Jeremy and Keri have said about during the pandemic. I think that the humility and honesty with team members who we're working with to say, look, this is unprecedented. I've not gone through this before. I've been in industry for 4 decades now, and I've seen a lot of economic challenges and recessions. But this was, I couldn't even fathom the scale of it. We adopted very similar tactics to the other organisations on communicate. People are scared. And we're relying on people to work in unusual circumstances to support our clients. We were ensuring that we were doing daily comms because government policy was changing regularly to make sure that people knew how they were going to be impacted. We also wanted to make sure that we were doing regular all hands where we could have time to explain some of the decisions that we were making as an organisation and be very thorough in explaining the rationale and why we were doing that, how long it would last, and what it would look like on the other side, and what it would mean for individuals. So I totally concur with the communication, being really open and transparent. And I think what that did for our organisation, I'm sure for many as well, was it brought together a sense of collaboration. And I certainly wasn't unique in the UK as MD. I'm very proud of the colleagues I worked with who collaborated really closely on making sure that we were looking after all thought workers and everywhere. I think we're talking about real estate. I think there's a false assumption that the world is going to go back to normal. And I agree with Jeremy. I don't believe it will. But I think there's also an assumption that everyone's going to be remote all the time now. And we don't need offices, and organisations have found a great way to make cost savings, etc. I think that's a bit of a fallacy. What we elected to do at Thoughtworks was we wanted to crowdsource and really understand from our 7,500 thought workers. Help us to reimagine the future. What does the future of work look like? What does the future of your work environment look like? And actually what we found was that people still want to be in an office environment when it's safe to do so, maybe not with the frequency that they had before, maybe not 5 days a week. And they still want to be on client site to a certain extent, but maybe again, not with the frequency. And working from home is certainly a convenience that people have responded very positively to. But it's that human contact is still important. Remote working has been a necessity, and for many it has been quite helpful and advantage. I concur with Jeremy if your environment's right to do so, but that people contact is important. And I think the essence of the conversation at the moment is that people need contact. They need to look people in the eye. They need to be able to sit across from somebody and have a cup of coffee to say, how's your day? And that's fundamentally is important, those bonded relationships, etc. So I think the crowdsourcing of what our future could look like, encouraging team members to participate in building that future, because it is uncertain and we don't know. And I think that shaping of it and feeling individuals have made a contribution to planning their future as we do come through this and reimagining that together, I think is very powerful. And I'm pleased that was a route that we took as an organisation.
This is what happens in the digital world when you meet yourself, when you're trying to ensure your dog's not barking and your kids aren't screaming, which is kind of happening in my background at the moment. So please forgive me. I had my mic muted. But I wanted to just, kind of, again, quickly summarize the things that you've all talked about. But again, I think the biggest one is that people, this is inevitably about people, and how we get through this is people remember how they felt or how you made them feel. And so I think it's an important, just kind of tentative leadership to consider that people have to come first. And if they don't, then you suffer the ramifications of that, as it were. I'd like to go to some questions. We have about 14 minutes left. The time has gone really quickly. I can't believe how quickly it's moving. But I'd like to go to a couple of questions because there were some pre-submitted questions that folks sent in via the website. If you have questions, anybody, the Q&A box is open, but I'm going to start with the pre-submitted questions. If you have other questions, please go to the website, put them in. We will likely come back to you anyway, so don't worry if we don't get to it. But I'd like to start, Jeremy, with you, because there's a really interesting one here. that made me raise my brow, considering that I'm sitting in the United States with 250,000 people who died from COVID and 6 million cases. There was lots of doom and gloom predicted. Here's the question for Africa as it relates to COVID-19. But that devastation doesn't seem to have manifested like we thought it might. Is that actually the case, or are cases underreported? What is it like in Kenya, and how are you guys managing through that? Because what people thought would happen has happened in the U.S. as opposed to anywhere else. We are the poster child for not necessarily getting it right. So, what's your thoughts about how that's happened, particularly in Kenya, but perhaps even on the continent more broadly?
Yeah, I mean, when COVID hit and we started seeing the numbers shoot up, we were very concerned because we have a lot of informal settlements where there's high densities of people living in very difficult social conditions. So there's no such thing as social distancing in those environments, and they're not necessarily that well off. So we were very worried that this thing was going to spread like a fire through, and that the healthcare facilities wouldn't be able to cope. And we didn't have adequate healthcare facilities for a sort of pandemic on this scale. But what actually happened is, I think the government took measures quite quickly around lockdowns and movements, and I think the private sector did a lot of measures that were going to actually help that. But a number of things came out. I think one thing that I think we're blessed with is that whilst we may not have been able to do the testing at the levels we would have liked, the number of cases of people going into hospital was something that we could actually track. And we were finding that about maybe 8 or 9 out of 10 people were either asymptomatic or mildly symptomatic, which is very different than it was in the West. We put that down to the fact that 50 to 60% of the population is pretty much under 25. Yeah, we have a much younger population than a lot of these other markets. We don't suffer from a lot of the illnesses of the West, which are illnesses associated with higher standards of living. So people generally, I would say, don't suffer the same levels of obesity, maybe same levels of high blood pressure, chronic conditions. So and that I think has also played a part. So, and then there's other theories around, whether they've had BCG vaccinations and just the level of immunity that we have in general. So we've been blessed that the number of people getting really sick has been manageable. We've had about 38,000 cases, but only 711 deaths. Bizarrely, the number of overall deaths in the country from all causes has reduced, because all this hand sanitization, curfews has reduced other deaths that have come through. So are the numbers understated? I think probably more people may have had COVID than realized they had COVID, but they were probably asymptomatic. We are hoping that remains and that we don't see a second wave coming through causing a lot of illness, the way we're seeing is happening in some of the other markets in Europe and the developed world.
Thank you. I mean, it's just amazing to see the difference in different places, how this is showing up. But yeah, thank you for that, because that really crystallizes something I hadn't thought about, and I knew this, but hadn't thought about how young the population is. That's huge, and the kinds of conditions which typically are impacted by COVID. So, Keri, this one's for you. Your business is at the intersection of arts and not-for-profit, two industries that have been particularly hard hit by the multiple crises, but that are also critically important for hope in the case of arts and supporting communities in the case of not-for-profit. What themes are emerging as the most significant in terms of impact in those two spaces?
Well, I think, we haven't really talked about the fact that the specific arts that we support are largely the media arts, film, documentary, and that the media field is undergoing a simultaneously kind of tectonic transition in addition to COVID, in addition to the racial justice reckoning, in addition to everything else, theaters are not open in the United States, at least. Even still, many theaters are not open, and when they are, they're social distance. So there is no way to actually share work, both in live performance, which we also support, and in film and media. So the idea of what happens when you come around that kind of communal storytelling, sort of like Ruth was saying, the urge to get together and share experiences, share stories with one another, understand the perspectives that the stories can bring. I think from the point of view of the artist and the audience, the sort of sudden taking away of that economically and experientially has been devastating. And I think the feeling of course, the opportunity in this is what's happened with the streamers. Here we see Netflix and Amazon and all of the ways that people can distribute and access content at home, offering a great opportunity and an incredible, I think, relief for many people to be able to immerse in those stories and have that outlet at this time. And yet, those companies are they're big companies. They're consolidating, and how what they choose to program relates to what the sort of wide range of diverse voices and content that we're supporting at Sundance is as yet an unknown as we move forward. So without the theaters, without some of the traditional ways, I think people are really nervous about the future of the media business. And so as we imagine what we're going to carry forward out of this, it isn't just remote work or how we deal with the work we do at Sundance. It's what context do those artists actually share their work with the world going forward, and how do they think about what success looks like when the financing models and the structures of business around it are totally different. But I will say that I've been incredibly inspired by the way the artists are getting their work out there. Theater artists recording things, podcasting, finding ways to use new technologies to tell their stories. And to me, there's sort of incredible seeds of hope across the board at the resourcefulness of the artists, knowing that they have to communicate. They're the ones who are going to chronicle the experience that we're having globally right now. They're the ones that are going to help us capture, distill, and make meaning of what's happening. And their creativity, their resourcefulness is a constant inspiration to me, and I think to all of our colleagues.
I think certainly to all of us. We look forward to that content. We need it. We need it to take our minds off of the stuff that we're experiencing. Ruth, a question here for you, and probably our final question, actually. And this is a big one. As somebody who lived in the UK for 20 years and came back just post-Brexit announcement to the US, you can't win. I came from one fire to the other. How has Brexit impacted your business and businesses in the UK, in addition to all of the other things you're experiencing?
Yeah, Brexit is hugely divisive, and irrespective of which side of the spectrum you're on, Brexit has happened. So, end of December last year, the UK officially left the European Union group of countries. This year, there has expected to be negotiations for a trade deal. So the UK understands how it will continue to operate business with the rest of the European Union. Pandemic hasn't helped. Those trade negotiations are delayed, let's just say, which is consequently meaning that all organisations are facing an operating climate of a no deal. And for many organisations, that's pretty catastrophic. What we've elected to do, certainly with our clients, is have some really open conversations about what are you anticipating is going to be a biggest hurdle. And I think undoubtedly the biggest one is the impact of supply chain. For many organisations out there, maybe if you're in the grocery sector or getting goods and services into the country is going without a deal, challenge potentially costly. And how our clients are looking at absorbing some of the costs of the potential risks of tariffs. So we've taken a view of having some very early discussions with clients and helping them trying to get ahead And as we loom towards a date that is in the sand, it's not going to change. We've been working with clients to accelerate some of their priorities so they can try and get products and services, improvements in supply chain, positive changes in to mitigate some of the disruption ahead of the end of Q4. And that's about as much as we can do in anticipation of we simply just do not know. We're all as business leaders very hopeful that we will hear in the coming days that a deal has been struck. But news today is that the EU now wants to take the UK to court, and it's alarming to think that. As we come out of a pandemic when everyone was supportive of one another, we've now moved into a period where we are back at conflict again and arguing. So uncomfortable times for business leaders, unquestionably. Trying to get ahead and be very open and communicative, and helping our clients to reprioritize what they thought was their roadmap is very different when you're facing into ensuring that your business can still operate on January the 1st next year. Certainly the president at times. I think it's tested any leader for sure. And I think, perhaps closing thought is this year has been a year of unquestionable change, but I think it has built resilience in a lot of people and a lot of organizations.
I think that you are right. I have to say I'm really grateful to each of the three of you. I know how much you have on your plates right now, so that you took the time to come and kind of just share your thoughts, but also to be here because folks need to hear from you. They need to hear what the next steps might be. They need to know, for me, knowing that you three are in the seats that you're in makes me very comfortable because you're very clear about the objectives and you're very clear about what's important. And ultimately that's people. So again, thank you for coming. Thank you for taking the time. I'll let you go back to your very busy jobs. But Jeremy, thank you. Ruth, thank you. Keri, thank you. We're all watching. You are wonderful leaders, and we're just grateful to be able to experience some of what you do every single day. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
So here we are. I am very excited, as you will have seen the previous panel. They are going to now sign off while I'm going into our next session. Thank you guys for coming. So here we are. There is an amazing thing coming up next. It's a documentary. The youth are watching. So I mentioned at the beginning, if you missed this part, that what was really important to me as a part of this conversation, the Town Hall Summit, we have global leaders, 16 of them from multiple continents. But as we were kind of going through the agenda and going through the content, the thing that was missing for me were youth voices. We can't talk about the future without including the future. And all of what we're talking about is what we want the future to be and what we reimagine the future to be. And so I started by saying, I want to talk to youth from around the world. And I just want to get their messages for world and business leaders that I'm going to play at the Town Hall Summit. Well, I started to have these conversations and was just floored by the activism, by the clarity, by these young people who were very clear about what they expect business and world leaders to leave for them as a legacy. And so the youth are watching emerged. It is a 45-minute documentary, which started as moments of people talking about their expectations. Today, I'm going to play part one, 20 minutes, about 21 or 22 minutes of part one. Tomorrow, you have to come back and see part two. Today we have Jabu from South Africa who will be joining us. We have Alex from Washington, D.C., the Washington, D.C. metro area, Silver Spring, Maryland. We have Ama Opong, who is from London. And we have Eden Fisher, who is from Cincinnati, Ohio, also in the U.S. Actually, I think I have Halima as well. So there are quite a few. The first five are today. I'm going to kick off The Youth Are Watching. I'm so excited. Love to hear your comments. Please put them in the chat. There will be a further premiere of this. This is the soft premiere. There will be a global premiere of this documentary in a couple weeks' time. So check my LinkedIn page to find out when it will be. It will be out there. But let's kick off with The Youth Are Watching.
My name is Halima Brucha.
My name is Alex Swan.
My name is Amma.
My name is Eden Fisher.
My name is Jabu Mtwa.
Ko Arizona Ariki Nofwali Ilija Aho.
This is South Africa, a country of nearly 60 million people and one of the most visited countries in the world. Jabu Mtwa is a 20-year-old university student who is studying law at Wits University in Johannesburg. He is fiercely proud of his South African heritage, but is a realist about the issues that plague his country. His activism is multifaceted, but is themed around improving his community, something that he lives by every single day.
I come from a working class family in South Africa. I myself was born in Durban and I lived there until I was 7 years old. In 2009, my family moved to Johannesburg, which is the most well-known city in South Africa, in search of a better lifestyle and job opportunities. Johannesburg is actually nicknamed the City of Gold, and us going there is almost equivalent to pursuing the American dream, if you like. From early on in my childhood, I realized that there was a huge importance in playing your part in improving the lives of the people in your community. Improving your community was almost a generational moral that was passed down in my family. Right now, every country's in lockdown. There's measures being put in place. We're not having our normal lives. So COVID-19 outbreak is definitely one that is a big challenge right now. This health crisis really has been exacerbated by the perennial economic recessions that the country has faced, which has been an issue for a couple of years. COVID-19 just acts to accentuate this. You could hear a lot of public opinion in the USA saying that the USA entered lockdown very late, and that's why maybe the cases have been sky high for all this time. But I think our country and our president was very smart and was very proactive in putting a lockdown very early on into the COVID-19, and it's done a lot of good for our country in the fight against the virus. So this particular challenge has been dealt with by the government, and the worst days of the pandemic from our side have definitely passed. Another challenge is corruption and poor governance within our ruling parties. Jacob Zuma, for one, is currently involved in several court proceedings regarding what is termed state capture, which is essentially a term used to describe the vast mismanagement of state funds for personal benefit. This has been a perpetual issue in my country, and it continues to be a significant obstacle to our economic development for over a decade now. The third challenge, which has become so omnipresent across South Africa, and quite frankly sickens me to the core, is gender-based violence and femicide. Women in South Africa are the targets of the most gruesome violence you can imagine. To briefly illustrate this, there's a frightening stat which says that in South Africa, 8 women are killed or raped every single day. I personally thought that the murder of a UCT student, which was a girl, she passed away last year. She was raped and murdered, and I thought that was going to be a turning point in the eradication of femicide in South Africa, and it turned out not to be. And although the president he formed some institutions that would deal with gender-based violence and femicide shortly after the murder of that student, women in South Africa continue to be violated, they continue to be raped, they continue to be killed and effectively dehumanized by a portion of South African men. This year, for example, a pregnant woman named Tshegofatso Pule was lynched by her boyfriend. Last month, a girl from my university was stabbed and killed by her boyfriend. I mean, there's so many victims of gender-based violence in South Africa, so much so that I can't possibly name all of them. The term issue is an understatement in this case, and unfortunately, this will continue to be a problem unless there aren't any harsher measures and laws and repercussions in place. George Floyd's death and the subsequent protests that followed were a poignant reminder of our past. What is more is that it coincided with a series of police killings in South Africa. So it wasn't only happening in the US, just like the domestic violence and gender-based violence, it's almost happening everywhere. There was a man named Collins Khoza, who was the first one to be killed by police in the initial stages of our lockdown. So the news of George Floyd essentially just aggravated the public outcry, not only on institutionalized racism, but the subtle police brutality that had ravaged our societies for years now. A few weeks ago, actually, there was yet another case of police brutality when a 16-year-old boy with Down syndrome, his name was Nathaniel Julius, was shot and killed by a member of the South African Police Service. There's actually legal proceedings going on right at this moment. 3 of them have been implicated. So that just emphasizes how this is a worldwide problem. It is absolutely insane, given the fact that it's understood that the boy was eating a biscuit before he got shot. So he was unarmed, a little boy with Down syndrome getting shot just like that by police. It's sickening. And I feel like I'm obligated as a global citizen to be part of improving and instituting change all around the world.
This is the Bay Area of Northern California, home to nearly 8 million people, including one of the highest concentrations of Muslims in the United States. This area is home to Halima Barusha, a fierce gender justice advocate who founded the student-led Gender Justice Center while studying at Seattle University, from which she graduated at the tender age of 19 years old. Halima currently serves as the advocacy manager at Alliance for Girls and is an outspoken campaigner against Islamophobia and the intersection of gender-based violence.
I grew up in the Bay Area. It is a pretty progressive space in California. I grew up in a really large Muslim community, and that was something my parents had intentionally done because they wanted me to be able to grow up around places that were affirming, people that understood what it meant to be Muslim. And I think post 9/11, that was something that was especially critical. As a young person, I saw a lot of instances of Islamophobia, gender-based violence, domestic violence. I had my own experiences with sexual harassment when I started high school. There was a phase in my life where I was going through all the different systems. I was really thinking about, how do I solve this problem? What can I do about it? And from a very young age, I was always very action-oriented. So when I saw these experiences happening in my community to people that I cared about when I was seeing them, and also having my own experiences, I was really thinking about, how do we solve this problem? Where can we go to? What are the resources available? I think when we approach things from a place of moving at the speed of trust and relationship, when we're committed to that, we're actually helping ourselves as organizations, as leaders, also move towards challenging things like white supremacy, which rely on creating a false sense of urgency that things need to happen, right now. And when we approach things with that mentality, when we approach issues with that mentality, we skip all these steps. And then 10 years later, we realize what we created was not effective. It actually could have caused more harm than good. We're in the midst of multiple crises, and we understand that during times of crisis, during times of climate chaos, public health pandemics, gender-based violence is increasing. And there are folks who are cut off, who are socially isolated, who don't have access to a caring adult, who don't have access to a phone, who don't have access to the internet. And those are very concerning things. So that's something that I've been working on in terms of advocacy, in terms of working with folks to find solutions, because we need to act quickly. If we don't act quickly, we're going to see this impact last even longer than expected. We have to start developing long-term strategies and plans, because you better believe corporations and companies, they have their 10-year plan, they have their 20-year plan. Why don't our communities have that vision in place? And why aren't we following up on that? And that's going to be the piece that gets us from reactive to proactive, right? For me, what was really frustrating was to see the shock from my own community, from the South Asians, to see the shock over the murder of George Floyd, to see the shock over the murder of Breonna Taylor. That to me was a sign that we have not been paying attention, we have not been doing enough, and we have a responsibility as non-Black people of color to make sure that our communities are actively engaging in long-term solidarity, in co-conspiratorship, and moving beyond reading books. I think it sparked a lot of conversation, but again, we need to really think about the outcome and the action and the end goals. change is not going to happen, with us sitting comfortably in our bedrooms. It's going to happen when we decide to get uncomfortable, when we decide to risk something. And as those, non-Black people of color, those who have more privilege, those who get to have the moral minority status, lighter skin, we need to put something on the line. We do.
This is Washington, D.C., the capital of the United States and home to the U.S. government. With a metropolitan population of 6.2 million people, this city is a diverse melting pot of cultures. Alex Swan, a local resident, is a staunch social justice activist who is focused on educational equity and voting rights. Like many young people, the onset of her activism was related to the experiences that she has endured.
I was first drawn to activism in 2015. In my high school, I was in a magnet program, so it was primarily white, and there were only a couple other Black students. But we felt like we were being disrespected and targeted within the program, so we started Black Cap, doing activism with the school board and with our school, and ending up changing the curriculum and getting some other measures in place to make the magnet programs more equitable for everyone. Knowing how amazing education could be and how amazing it has been at certain aspects for me, and then knowing certain people don't get that because of the color of their skin or because of their gender or any type of thing that could marginalize someone, could be taking away their ability or their chance to get an excellent education, informal and formal education. So I think that that's what makes me tick. Most of the things that I do in activism revolve around education until this year when I started diving heavily into civic engagement surrounding our new election. In 2018, during Atlanta's gubernatorial election, my vote was purged from the rolls after I registered to vote in Atlanta. That was when I realized how deep the voter suppression runs in our country, and I decided that I needed to start doing more actions around the elections. Right now, my activism is mostly revolving around civic engagement, and I've stayed in this field because I think that it's a really important solution in the meantime while we're working toward bigger solutions. But the election is something that we can do right now that is going to have an effect on different people, and that will help people live better lives despite who is potentially in office. It's basically about their policies and their people. It's not specifically the person that's in office. One of the things that is most challenging about the United States in this current moment is that people are finally starting to realize that the system was not built for everyone, and it wasn't built to serve everyone. Now that people are starting to realize that, and it's coming more into the mainstream, people are trying to figure out other ways of living and other ways of being, but it's really difficult because the system's been in place for so long. So I think the biggest challenge right now is figuring out a way to reimagine our political system and our government that will work for everyone. But the people at the top right now are less interested in seeing change than the people who are on the bottom trying to create the change. So it's become more of a strict dichotomy, and it's a really strict line between the two sides, and trying to figure out a way to mend that and to get the people at the top to change their ways or to be more inclusive. That's one of the things that's most challenging about the current system, is that it wasn't built for anybody besides white, heterosexual Christian men. Despite the US being a global power, we still need a lot of influence to be able to change for the better and to reimagine sort of how we should be treating people and how our government should be interacting with people, because the way that it's being done is not effective at all.
This is London, England. With a population of nearly 9 million people, it is the fifth most populous nation in Europe. Ama Opong is a young woman of mixed heritage from London. George Floyd's death has sparked her activism, and she's trying to navigate racism in a society that doesn't often acknowledge that racism exists. Ama is a recent university graduate and is now speaking openly for the first time about her experiences as a Black person in Britain.
One thing that I
want people to know about the UK is that we've got so much further to go than what people think we do. Seeing the inequalities in Britain, in most of the NHS staff that have died from COVID have been black and brown people. Most of the people here impacted by COVID-19 have been black and brown people. And just seeing the systemic nature of how racism and racist policies and environmental racism and everything impact everything. And, you know, I feel like the virus has just brought all this to life. It's just been quite hurtful to watch, I would say.
Racism is a cancer. It comes in many different forms, both covert and overt, in actions and in words. It's so common and frequent that you barely notice that you've spent a lifetime internalising it. Though racism is as obvious as a police officer kneeling on a man's neck for nearly 10 minutes, it's also as subtle as going into an empty Tiffany's shop and not being served, presumably because the cashiers assume you can't afford anything. It's being told by the customer that they prefer not to be served by people like you. It's the whole class staring at you and the teacher lets them know that today's history lesson will be on the slave trade. It's your dad being told he was the perfect candidate for the role, but they decided to go with someone else instead. It's being called a packy at 8 years old when you don't even know what the word means. It's a stranger at the cafe asking to touch your hair, making you feel like an animal in a zoo. It's your school friends thinking you and the black boy in your friendship group would make a cute couple. It's being asked where are you from in that tone that lets you know they're not asking what British town you were born in. It's being likened to a gorilla. It's frequently doubting your abilities and wondering if you got your job to fill a company's quota. It's not bothering to make an effort for parties because the boys there probably don't fancy black girls anyway. It's people at primary school who know you have a white mum but haven't yet met your dad, so ask if you're adopted. Racism is insidious and a part of everyday life. It's not just being called the N-word when you're walking down the street. Many of the behaviours outlined here I didn't even realise were racist until this week, when I've been triggered into dissecting and reliving them. So Lord knows the white people who said and did these things didn't think they were racist either. That shows just how entrenched and normalised racism is in Britain. A lot of work is still to be done, and to be honest, I can't imagine a day when racism is eradicated completely, but the past few days have really given me some hope. I thank everyone who is making a conscious effort to self-educate, examine and reflect. It's appreciated. I myself also have a lot of work to do, and I've remembered and cringed at things that I've said and done in the recent past that would have caused hurt to people of other backgrounds. I don't share these experiences to be pitied, but rather to outline the casual and flippant nature of prejudice, also because, as I said, I think hearing the experiences of individuals is more impactful than seeing statistics or figures. Let's all keep making efforts to unlearn and relearn together, and let's keep on keeping on.
This is Cincinnati, Ohio, a city in the Midwestern United States. The metro area borders northern Kentucky with a population of 2.2 million people. While Cincinnati is consistently ranked amongst the top 10 most racially segregated cities in America, it recently received its 5th consecutive perfect score from the Human Rights Campaign, an LGBTQ advocacy organization that annually rates cities' friendliness to lesbian, gay, bisexual, transgender, and queer people who live and work there, an interesting juxtaposition. Eden Fisher is an LGBTQ activist who lives and works in Newport, Kentucky. A former student at Northern Kentucky University, she now works in the Office of LGBTQ Programs and Services in the Center of Student Inclusiveness. She works tirelessly to ensure inclusion for students, but also the wider community.
So I was actually born in Florida, but I moved really quickly to Louisville when I was young, and I lived with my mom and my stepdad until I went to college. And I came up here to Northern Kentucky and absolutely loved the area. My high school actually was really diverse for a public school. We actually made really good LGBTQ strides the year that I graduated. A young girl she fought to be able to use the girls' restroom because that's how she aligned, and the principal and everybody actually listened and took action. It was amazing. But when I came to NKU, I immediately found the LGBTQ office, became involved. I went to the Common Ground meetings, which is the Gay Straight Alliance club on campus. I went to TGI, which is the Gender Initiative for transgender students. I went to Lavender for non-binary and femme-aligned students. I became involved as much as I could be. And I quickly realized that I found a really amazing community where everybody accepted who I was, even if I didn't know who I was yet. I found my voice in college for activism. While I was a part of the office on campus, I found my community not only in the LGBTQ office, but within the Center of Student Inclusiveness in general. For me, activism isn't only going out and standing up to hate preachers on campus and being in their face and telling them that they're wrong, but also creating a safe space on campus for students that can't go home for the holidays, or just building a safe community to help people feel comfortable being themselves. I think some of the things that are most challenging right now are equality and discrimination. Newport is the 20th city in Kentucky to pass the Fairness Ordinance Law protecting LGBTQ individuals, which outlaws discrimination in housing, employment, and public accommodations. There are currently only 20 states that have banned conversion therapy based on sexual orientation and gender identity or expression, and Kentucky isn't one of those. I've never been personally fired or denied a job based on those factors, but I've been treated differently from coworkers and bosses because of them. And I would never try to be someone else to become a job, but for some people, it's like hiding a tattoo or a piercing. They're going to put themselves aside to get what they need, and that's not okay. They shouldn't have to do that. My activism is all about it takes one person to change something. Not everyone can go out there, but you can help in other kinds of ways, like supporting local businesses, donating, being there for loved ones. Being a beacon of safety and open-mindedness for someone, even just one person, is amazing.